what we're going to do is we're going to, as a kind of an experiment, we're going to do an animation based entirely on the use of graphs. So whereas we tend to kind of work in the timeline in a conventional sense, dropping keyframes, which is absolutely fine and an essential way of working, we're going to leave that briefly and go into our graph editor, and we're going to stay there for the production. Okay. So first thing you'll need to do is to try and target the property that you're going to be using. In this case, it's the position property. So I hit the P key to open that. And I'm not even going to click on that, but I am going to open up my value graph and select the position property. And you'll see now that I have two lines on the graph, my X values and my Y value. Okay, so this has a current position of 925 on the X and 380 on the Y. Okay. Now, so what I want to do is I want to target the specific property that I'm going to change here, which is the Y property. And I'm going to use the pen tool to click and add a keyframe directly onto the graph. I'm going to switch, yeah, I'm in value graph, I am. Okay. And I'm going to go a certain amount of frames down the timeline. I'm just going to go 12 frames. And I'm going to, again, click on the Y. And I'm going to hold down Command, and I'm going to drag that up. Now, because I'm only adjusting the Y curve, I don't need to worry too much about it going from side to side. Now, I'm going to just drop it there. And last thing I'll do then is I'll go 24 frames down, and I'm going to click to add another keyframe. And again, hold down Command to bring up the selection tool, and I'm going to bring that back here. Now, if this is a little bit imprecise going to the top again, then what I can do is get the Y value and just copy it out of there and then paste it in there. And that'll make sure that they're both in exactly the same place. So now we have down, up, down, up, because it's, again, it's within that work area. It's just looping backwards and forwards, and sorry, it's looping around, so it's not using an expression necessarily. Now, so far, so robotic, very linear, up, down, but with no velocity at all, which is when we get into our speed graph. And the speed graph, you'll see, is also flatlining because we're at a constant speed. It's at 1200 pixels per second throughout the entire animation. So what I can do is I can get that point there, get my selection tool, and I'm going to drag that keyframe down so that it's closer to, I'll just drag it to 0 for now. And I'm going to do the same at the end so that it starts slow and it ends slow before it loops back in. And I should now have some velocity. Not much because I haven't given it any influence. So as I click and drag on the influence, you'll see that the curve changes rapidly because it's giving a different relative speed at the start. It's getting slower in this case, which means it needs to go faster before it gets to that point. Then we drag our keyframe, the two sides of our keyframe, the incoming side and the outgoing side, until we start to see something resembling more of a spike. And then we go back in, we play with the influence until we start to see more of that kind of speed spike that we're used to seeing when something is reaching kind of maximum velocity. And now we have velocity and some bit of a bounce. We can play with that to try and get it to be, you know, a little bit more even at the start or less severe at the end, or whatever we need to do. And we're just changing the speed, we're changing the influence, and we're kind of just moving things around that way. Now, this is when we can go back into our value graph, and you'll see that we now also have a curved Y value. So this is important because I didn't do this. But After Effects automatically changed my straight line to a curved line because it's now changing its position in a different way. Okay. So this is a very simple but effective way of creating something like a bounce. And then we can just pop in our motion blur for a bit of realism. And then you can start getting into your scale and stuff as we do for our squash and stretch. So we can do that next. Just going to drag up my timeline there a little bit and zoom out. And I'm going to hit the S to bring up my scale and highlight it so that it shows up on the graph. And then we're doing the same thing. We're adding keyframes through our pen tool, and we can add a couple of keyframes, and then I can hold down Command, bring down that is the X scale. So that is, no, that's both. Right. Now, what I need to do here is I need to disconnect them, which I forgot to do. Okay. So in this case, I need to target the height when it gets down there. Which means I can just kick off a little bit of a scale until I see that value pop out, and then I can click and drag that down as needs be. Okay, and then I get no, I've done something to, oh, I need to come back up. So it should kind of bounce, squash, stretch, come back up. I've probably gone too far with my squash. Now, I think what has happened there is my Y value has changed slightly, so I can actually click and drag that now in the graph. Don't know how that happened, but it did. So now we have just a little bit of bounce in the text as well. And again, that's just represented there by that little dip in the height value, which is represented by green, whereas the X value stays the same. Now, if I wanted to, I could bump up that and it would give me a width change, which give us a bit more. You can just about catch it there as it hits the ground. It kind of bounces up and stretches. So this gives you hopefully an insight into how to use the curves, and in this case we're just using curves, but in reality what you would do is you would probably be going backwards and forwards between the keyframes here and the curves there. Now, one of the reasons you want to be out here is that it's just more intuitive and easier to pick up, drag, copy, paste and move keyframes around. But when you want to get into the minutiae of how things move in between those keyframes, that's where the curves within the graph will actually give you a better insight. And lastly, just to repeat, that the speed graph is probably the more natural way of visualizing speed and velocity and should be part of most of what you do, regardless of whether or not you're using the value graph.